So the latest update has brought us Ines, and I gotta say, when it comes to Colossus fights in particular, she is the largest disappointment we have had in some time. But when it comes to dungeons and now the new Void Erosion activity, she is the newly uncontested queen of mobbing. But let's talk about why that is. And I know it's gonna be tempting to skip ahead and just try and snippet out shit that we're using in the video, but please bear with me as we first discuss how her abilities work, as it is incredibly important. The first thing to address is Ines' Conductor buff. It's not part of her passive or any specific skill, but any skill damage she deals will always apply the Conductor debuff to enemies. And the debuff just makes it so when dealing skill damage to an enemy with Conductor active, then the power modifier of the skill gets increased by an amount that is different between every skill. Speaking of the skills though, her first skill is Chain Lightning, and this is your bread and butter for dealing damage. It shoots out a very fast moving projectile that at a minimum will bounce 7 times. But for every 40% skill range bonus you have, you get another bounce. So say you have skill expansion for 90 something percent more range, that 90 is divided by 40 and floored. So instead of just 2.25-ish, it's just 2 more bounces for 9 total. You'll note this ability doesn't actually have a range cap, so you can actually build up to the full 200% range bonus that your character is limited at, and get up to 12 bounces total with a 5 max bonus. However, you typically won't actually build that way, and we'll talk about that later. The only other important thing to note before moving on though is that the bounces can return to the same target. Ina's second ability is Lightning Conductor, which lets you deal damage to a limited number of enemies within range, but if the enemies are already conductive, then they don't count towards the target limit, and the skill will just deal damage to them anyways, while also finding new targets to hit. Just think of this as the skill you use after everyone has already been shocked, because you don't want to use this to spread conductivity, you want to use this on enemies that are already conductive. And kind of like the first skill, where the first skill gets more bounces with more range, on this skill you get more targets with more range. The third skill is Discharge, and in a perfect world this would be an incredible skill, but we do not live in a perfect world. Discharge holds you in place while charging up a blast. The longer you hold it, the more damage it will deal via a scaling multiplier. However, there is a perfect release window, where if you release there, you get the full damage bonus, and Ines will do a little spin animation when releasing the charge. Otherwise, if you miss the perfect release window, you can still keep charging and do more damage, it's just not going to be as much. This, along with the fourth skill, do not actually cost MP, and use Plasma, which is her new unique resource. And if it weren't for that, this ability would be hosing down every boss in the game. This is an issue that we will talk about later, regarding why she sucks unfettered ass when it comes to Colossus fights. Her fourth skill is Snare Hunter, and this thing is beautiful. You launch a projectile that deals damage on impact, but also deploys a Jaber-like electric turret AoE that deals damage on a pretty quick interval, but then also in a larger AoE as well, deals even more damage per tick, but on a slower interval. In addition, after casting, you get a huge 50% move speed bonus. The larger AoE has a target limit, unlike the inner AoE, and like the first and second skills, the limit is increased by your bonus range. The skill has a 2-stack limit, and when it comes to area control, you are not going to find anything better than this for a couple of reasons, and a large part of that is the passive. Ines' passive is probably the most fucked up thing I've ever seen in this game, and there's still one part of it I haven't even figured out yet, but at a minimum, the passive takes your MP, takes 6.5% of that, and adds it into your base skill crit rate. So say you had 500 MP, you times 500 by 0.065, which comes out to 32.5 plus her base rate of 15%. She now has a base crit rate before mods of 47.5%. That is obviously a shitload. As a passive, that's already strong enough, frankly, but then it makes it so if you ever get a skill crit on an enemy with Conductor, you have a 5% chance to get 5% MP back as a refund, which is going to resolve across a large spread of enemies any and all MP issues you might have had in dungeons in particular. But skill crits also have a guaranteed chance to proc Dark Current, which is how her passive deals damage. Dark Current deals damage in an AoE when triggered, and when it is triggered, it will always apply Conductor afterwards. When an enemy with Conductor is killed, or when Conductor expires on an enemy, it will still trigger Dark Current anyways. And what's amusing about this is it means that once Conductor is applied to an enemy, it is permanent. It will never go away. Reason being is even if it expires, it triggers Dark Current, and because it triggers Dark Current reapplies Conductor. So it's this kind of vicious cycle. The fucky thing here is that the passive damage of Dark Current changes every time it hits. And I don't mean a little. This shit makes zero sense. It'll do more damage by leagues, it'll deal less damage, even if your character is holding perfectly still, not doing anything. The damage will just keep changing. Normally, I like to pride myself on getting the exact math for you guys on all of my character code for the build calculator website, and I do have it all figured out for every ability she has, but this passive in particular is probably going to take me a few weeks to figure out, and since it's not even close to her damage source, source, I am going to be giving it a pass in this video. If I ever do figure it out, I'll add the info to the pinned comment, but for now the assumption is it is either bugged to hell, or it has a randomized component to its damage, in which case, fuck that. The passive has a Transcendant mod called Plasma Ball, and this one is actually super cool if you need more survivability and can justify the drawback, because passively and in exchange for losing out on the entire crit rate bonus that you got before, and without any skill casts or resource consumption, you literally don't have to do anything. You just passively generate an overshield that will last for 60 seconds, and when broken or expired, it has a cooldown before refreshing itself, but you don't actually have to do anything for that to happen. This does mean, though, that you want as much cooldown reduction as possible if you ever use this mod, and I mean everything you can get. You want it on your Reactor, you want all your cooldown mods possible, everything. If you're taking this mod, you're taking it to survive, not to deal damage, because you're throwing away your crit rate. And if you're gonna survive using this shield, you need the smallest cooldown possible so it can refresh itself. Her only other Transcendent mod right now is Time of the Hunting Hounds, which modifies her first and third skills. On the first skill, it makes it stackable up to 3 charges, giving it a little bit of a shorter cooldown, which is good. You deal a little more damage per bounce, but the projectile moves a little slower and you get fewer base bounces. In addition, it increases the cost of additional bounces in terms of the range conversion. That said, this is still a super handy change, as it converts the skill arcane from singular to tech, which lets you use this for skill spam and getting secret garden stacks. On the third skill, it also converts from singular to tech, and while it doesn't say it very well, it actually completely removes the charging multiplier from the ability, so you can't deal double damage anymore. Instead, it just makes it so you dash instead of throwing lightning, and when charged up, it just increases your range on the dash. It doesn't even increase your damage. I will say this particular skill conversion does suck. The base ability on your third does way more damage, can get that double damage bonus, and it doesn't have a clunky dash animation. I do not like this particular skill. With that in mind, let's talk about what we're using as well as why we're using it, and I do need to clarify right off the rip, this build is for Void Erosion. I do actually take Hunting Hounds on our Transcendent mod for the tech conversion as well as the shorter cooldowns on my first ability, and then for general survivability we take increased HP and HP amplification. You do not take Stim Accelerant lest you lose out on max MP, and we're already going to be doing that because with our cooldown mods we have MP conversion here, and then we take Nimble Fingers, focus on electric, focus on tech. Ines is absolutely a skill spam character, and while it may seem like a drawback to have MP conversion here at a loss of max MP, assuming you have a max MP roll on your sensor, then combined with skill insight and front lines, you're still going to be at 98% skill crit rate, meaning it's really not that big of a deal. Now, if you have MP conversion and Stim Accelerant, that's obviously not good, but having one MP drawback is actually harmless. You'll note though that I didn't include emergency measures in here, and someone's probably going to comment in here telling me I could reach the extra 2% crit rate to get up to 100%, but you don't really need emergency measures here. And that's because if you're doing Void Erosion, you want more HP, and to fit more HP, you have to lose some mod somewhere. You're not going to cut a cooldown mod. It's not like you can kill your only range mod, and it's not like you're going to cut your other HP mod, meaning the mod that you can cut that will result in the smallest damage loss possible is emergency measures. And then lastly, yes, we take skill expansion here for general range increases all around. Playing Ines without at least this mod for range feels like shit. For mod swaps, you can swap HP amp for just about anything you want. If you're doing 400% or much easier content, it's actually not a bad idea to swap fucking HP amp for maximize range to get more bounces, because enemies in 400% and lower are not going to be anywhere near as strong. So you would benefit from more ping pong instead of more damage. For that same reason, you can take off Hunting Hounds in easier content for more bounces, but that is entirely up to you. Other than that, there shouldn't actually be any other mod swaps to make unless you build for the Plasma Ball Shield build, in which case you want to stack your MP to be higher. I am not including a boss build in this video because you should not be using Ines for a boss fight. The only exception to this would be using the Plasma Ball build for Deathstalker. That's probably the only actual legitimate use, because otherwise, if you need an electric nuke, take Sharon, and if you need an electric sustain, just take Transition Bunny. The reason Ines's boss potential is shit is due to how hard it is to build Plasma. Her primary damage dealing abilities are her Bouncy Ball from her 1, which costs MP, no big deal there, her Charge Release from her 3, assuming you aren't using Hunting Hounds, because that does a shit ton of damage, and then the AoE Electric Turret from her 4. However, problem here is you can't generate Plasma without freshly applying the Conductor debuff. But in a boss fight, when there's only one enemy, the only time you're really going to be able to do that is when Conductor expires on the boss and reapplies itself, or when the boss summon minions, which basically translates translates to most of Inez's boss damage is locked behind her 3 and 4, and you can't realistically use them due to the need to take 30 years to build plasma before you could possibly cast one of them. Dungeons do not face that issue because Ines has no shortage of enemies to shock and gain plasma from, as well as more enemies to hit with crits to get MP back, which is why we didn't take any cost mods or bother with MP Collector, because that would be a general damage loss. But in a boss fight that isn't Devourer, because yeah, sure, anyone can kill Devourer, you would likely need to build into cost. And if you do end up building into cost on Ines, it's going to be at the loss of another crucial damage mod, and at which point, why the fuck are you even bringing her into a boss fight instead of sharing her bunny? If you have to have an electric character. Ines royally fucks over any dungeon or Void Erosion mission, but she is not a boss character. Please do not attempt to build her that way. When it comes to the Reactor, you want an electric tech base with substats as cooldown and then either crit damage or tech power ratio. An alternative is actually range, as you'd eke out 1 extra bounce with a high enough roll on your Reactor, but that is just about it. Components, you all saw this coming, it's still the Slayer set. Someone is guaranteed to try and argue in the comments that the Hunter set is good for her, and no, it's not. MP is not an issue. You'd only take it for the 2-piece cooldown effect, but Slayer is just a much better set for her, with a much larger damage increase for dealing with elites and dungeon bosses. The weapon here is going to be Secret Garden, which when casting a tech skill has a 50% chance to give you a stack that will increase your power optimization bonus. This is the exact same bonus that your Reactor gives, and since when hunting Hounds is on, every single skill is a tech skill, that means you're virtually guaranteed to have 100% uptime on all 3 stacks of Secret Garden, giving the maximum bonus with ease. If you're confused on how skill power is calculated or how Secret Garden gets factored into all the math, please watch the video shown on screen for a good explanation. And then that is more or less it. She fucks. I was running dungeons earlier with my friend who was on Freyna, and even he was like, yeah, Freyna doesn't feel so good in comparison to what you're rocking there. On this build in particular too, you've got enough cooldown to always cast your 4 before the move speed bonus would wear off, meaning you're going to be cruising through dungeons with abilities that auto-target enemies aggressively as fuck through walls, and I do absolutely believe she is going to be the way going forward for any generalized mobbing activity. Bunny and Freyna have been power crept, and I think that's fucking hilarious.